The global economic forecast for the rest of 2019 looks stormy as some analysts see dark clouds on the horizon. Economies across Europe are slowing, China's growth is decelerating, and trade tensions have spawned uncertainty. In April, the International Monetary Fund cut its 2019 global growth outlook to 3.3%, which may be down only slightly from an earlier forecast of 3.5%. However, it marks the weakest growth rate since 2009, when the world was gripped by a recession. Some analysts warn that another recession looms, perhaps even more serious than the one a decade ago. What can be done to avert another economic crisis? And is the forecast all doom and gloom, or are there glimmers of hope? I recently spoke with a more pessimistic expert, Frank-Jürgen Richter, the former director of the World Economic Forum and now chairman of Horasis, an independent think tank that focuses on global business. Frank, thank you very much for joining us today. Now, you build a business out of advising governments and the private sector on issues such as globalization and trade. And in a very recent opinion piece, you predicted that the next financial crisis will be worse than the 2008 crisis, and you also proposed some ways how the world could prepare for it. Explain for us, why do you think it's going to be worse than the year 2008, and how soon is that going to come to us?
The current state of the world is quite gloomy, and we are learning about bad news every morning, ranging from terrorism and the terrible attacks in Sri Lanka, just telling us what happened to Brexit and to the US-China trade war. Most of the large companies globally now are about to revise their growth figures. Growth is very soft, and they hold back on investments. And I believe we might enter a new economic crisis. If you think about public and private debt globally combined, we are now at 250% of GDP. It's 30% above what we experienced in 2008. Also, with the US-China trade war, countries like China, of course, in the US, but even European countries like Germany, very much depending on export, might suffer. So I believe we are entering a phase of stagnation, which might go into even a technical recession and an economic crisis by the year's end or by the first quarter next year. And maybe there are two reasons why I'm so pessimistic. We see the rise of populism, nationalism and protectionism, and much less collaboration than in 2008. In 2008, everybody worked together, central banks, governments across the globe, and there was really the aim and the goal to fight the economic crisis. Now, with this rise of nationalism, everybody is fighting against everybody. It's like a dog-eat-dog mentality.
So you basically are predicting a much worse economic crisis coming before the end of this year, most likely, or at the beginning of next year. Well, in an April piece, the chief executive of BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, Larry Fink, he said that he sees no sign of a global recession in the coming 12 months. He also added that the central banks have loosened their policy above all because the weak fourth quarter of 2018, and he said we'll go through a phase in which things are not great, but also not bad. How do you see his argument?
I might disagree with him, and of course he is arguing from a US perspective. The US economy was doing quite well until recently, from the 2% GDP growth under Obama years going up to 3%. Of course, all linked to the tax cuts President Trump started in the beginning of his presidency. But now the effect of the tax cuts is kind of fizzling out. By the year's end, we might be back to 2%. With the coming trade war and frictions. You
mean the ongoing?
Ongoing, exactly. We might even go lower than 2%, maybe reaching 1% very soon. And then we are soon into technical recession. If you look into other markets like Europe, some countries are already facing a technical recession, like Italy. And Italy is a much bigger market than Greece. Greece was at the center of the economic crisis in 2008. But if Italy is falling, I think the whole Eurozone is falling. then a few of the emerging markets like Turkey, even Russia and Brazil are in big trouble as well. So the signs are not very good.
So you think that he was talking about the United States economy probably not looking too bad in the next 12 months. Do you think there is a possibility that things can go bad outside the United States and yet stay relatively manageable inside the United States? Do you see that scenario happening?
I don't think so, because nowadays the world is so integrated, and with globalization and supply chains, you can't really be isolated anymore. And China, for example, out of the economic crisis 10 years ago, people talked about the decoupling of the Chinese economy, and even China might feel the headwind. So everything is being integrated this time, and that's really the issue, that with globalization you can't really just fight for yourself.
Yeah, well, you talked about this trade war and the implications of it if it is not resolved properly. Well, at this moment we understand that significant progresses have been made in the trade negotiation between the two sides, and there are all kinds of guesses when an agreement is going to be coined. So in case that is the case, in case that really goes through, will that change your outlook?
Yes, I think it's like a double whammy of the US-China trade war and Brexit. Of course, if we have a soft Brexit and if we have an agreement, things look much, much better. It's just a downturn, but not an economic crisis. Personally, I believe there will be no deal signed in May. There have been,
why not?
Because President Trump is now focusing in on China. It's my guess. He had all the internal issues back home, and now the Mueller report is out, and I think he's in a position of strength. He wants to be re-elected, and I think a very easy target is China. And I'm pretty sure there won't be no deal signed in May, and maybe the whole negotiation might drag on until the end of the year. And hopefully there will be a deal signed, but if it's very unfortunate, then the real trade war will start.
How bad is the situation going to be if indeed no trade deal is signed between the two sides until second half of this year, let's say?
It'll be very bad. I would say for the US at least -1% GDP growth, for China maybe -2%. And for countries like Germany, -1%. Think about German car manufacturers manufacturing in China and exporting to the US. So they're kind of in between, and everybody is involved.
As you mentioned, in 2009, the world was able to talk to each other, collaborate under the framework of the G20, for instance. And right now, at this moment, with populism, with economic nationalism, you think it is still possible? We
see a lack of leadership, especially in the Western countries. There's no single leader coming up. President Macron was very much in the limelight when he came to power. He said, he will be saving Europe and maybe the world, but now he's under attack back home, the Yellow Vest movement, and there's a lack of trust in our institutions in Europe and in the US, and that's the reason, this lack of leadership, that we can't really come to multinational agreements anymore. I would love to see China taking a leading role. We have the One Belt One Road Summit, and it's a very historic chance, I think, to go for an agreement and to find an agreement.
How significant do you think the Belt and Road Initiative, given in the context of all the things that we talked about, the possible economic recession, the kind of political landscape we're experiencing, and the lack of global leadership you just mentioned, what kind of potential do you think the Belt and Road is representing on the part of China for global economic governance? I think
it's a good initiative. China should now add on the physical infrastructure, adding also the soft infrastructure like education and services to complement the physical infrastructure. But it's an important initiative, and I would wish to see countries like Japan and countries like India joining the One Belt One Road initiative, and even maybe doing things together in Africa. There, India and Japan are competing with Chinese interest. But why not collaborating? It would be good for the continent.
Switzerland, of course, you understand the situation. What kind of opportunity is Switzerland seeing in being part of the Belt and Road Initiative?
I think Switzerland wants to be an active partner, and not just being in China. Of course, there's a lot of investment in China. but going to third countries together, you know, for example, to Central Asia, countries like Uzbekistan or Kazakhstan, and Chinese and Swiss companies can jointly go there. And if you read the status of the Belt and Road Initiative, it's actually an open invitation to companies from all around the world, but many multinationals just don't know it, and they don't know how to apply and how to get involved. I think Swiss companies can take the lead because we got this free trade agreement, a very pragmatic partnership between both countries, even though, of course, China is a very big one and Switzerland is a very small one.